Welcome back. Rome at this point is a duality. Two contrasting realities become evident at this point in Roman history. Let's turn to two examples: another slave revolt and a mystery cult. In 134 BCE, some 70,000 slaves defeated a Roman army in Sicily before being put down by emergency reinforcements. These slaves would ravage Sicily again in 104 BCE. And let's contrast this to the image you see here of the Roman mystery rites. This is from one of the houses preserved in Pompeii, featuring an astonishing cycle of wall paintings executed around 50 BCE. This gives its house its name, the Villa of Mysteries. The exact meaning of these images is still debated, but some scholars argue that they depict a succession of ritual practices. Here, a young woman being whipped, perhaps as part of initiation ceremony, while another woman performs a dance.
Now, it wasn't all doom and gloom. There were the Brothers Gracchi. In 133 BCE, Tiberius Gracchus was elected a tribune of the people. He proposed to remedy the rift between rich and poor Romans by redistributing property. Small farmers were losing lands to patricians and equestrians. Gracchus invoked older laws that had limited the amount of land a single individual could own. We could consider the motives. The Roman army was forced to expand its presence abroad and needed more manpower. But a man had to meet property qualifications to serve in the army, and the available pool of citizen soldiers was shrinking. The army could be strengthened if more of Rome's inhabitants could qualify for military service.
True. With the support of his brother Gaius, Tiberius Gracchus accordingly proposed that estates be no larger than 300 acres per citizen, plus an additional 150 acres for each child. Many aristocratic estates exceeded these measures, and senators attempted to quash it, of course. The Gracchi were truly well loved and supported. Not Senators would ensure that Gracchus's co-tribunes would veto this legislation. Gracchus, of course, would retaliate, arguing that the tribunes who opposed the people's interests were betraying their office. They planned to stand for re-election when his term expired. Conservatives alleged that he was attempting a dictatorship and murdered him and his supporters. 10 years later, his brother Gaius Gracchus would renew his older brother's struggle after being elected to the same office, and of course, meeting the same fate.
Their reforms would take hold, albeit after their deaths. Land distribution, the stabilizing of the price of grain in Rome, and checking the abuses of the senatorial class by giving the equestrians greater powers. They imposed controls on provincial governors, suspected of exploiting their subjects for personal gain, and proposed to extend full Roman citizenship to all of the allied states of Italy. The Senate had Gaius Gracchus proclaimed an outlaw, and he and several thousand of his supporters were executed.
We have the decline in the rural population, which puts stress on cities and, of course, the government welfare system. But let's think of what he means by land reform. Specifically, they wanted to redistribute the land to poorer farmers to reassert government authority and, more importantly, prevent riots and stabilize the system. We have a bunch of wealthy landowners who, of course, are running their property based on slaves, which forces the lower, if you want to think of them in a modern sense, middle class farmers out of their jobs. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And as far as Rome's concerned, with the poor being over 1/3 of the population being destitute, those are the ones the state must support, and those are the ones who are rioting in the streets. Gracchi They're just trying to prevent this.
Now, much of this strife was caused by Rome's generals. Let us consider Gaius Marius. He was a soldier from an obscure provincial family. He fought a successful campaign in North Africa and was elected consul in 107 BCE. He was elected to the office of consul 6 more times. The lesson is that a man of no family connections or political experience could override opposition from older political elites if he had the support of the army.
Popularity of the Gracchi among the plebs suggested a new path to power for men willing to count on the favor of the people. Most of these men were former army commanders who traded in their military victories and the wealth they had gained from said plunder to win popular support. You have to think of it this way: people are throwing large, lavish parties, feasts, feeding thousands of people at a time with bread and wine. And in doing so, you just have a very popular message, kind of like this week's sponsor, as you would see in a YouTube video, except for here, this feast is brought to you by the Brothers Gracchi. You are being fed and watered and entertained by the Brothers Gracchi, right? This is the kind of power that people like Marius would also wield. Marius would abolish the property qualification that had limited military service, and because of that, he would also, in this historian's opinion, be the one to kill Rome in the long term. We'll get to that. The pool of soldiers would now include the urban poor and landless peasants. He had a career as a Roman legionnaire, and this career of his own would make the Roman legionnaire career, now for these poor peasants, a career end in and of itself with full benefits. A soldier's loyalty at this point becomes purely to his commander, not the idea of the Roman state. They want to go in, get their benefits, get their property, and get out. And now, thanks to Marius, it's possible.
Now, occurring at the same time as Marius, we have Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who had fought during the Social War of 91 to 88 BCE, which resulted in the extension of Roman citizenship throughout the peninsula. Sulla attempted to lead the army to war in Anatolia. Marius forced the Senate to deny Sulla's claim. Sulla responded by marching on Rome with the legions that had fought under his command. The Senate awarded him the army command, but Marius defied the Senate and seized control of the city with his own legions.
Fighting among political rivals could lead to full-blown civil wars. Sulla would be appointed dictator with no term limit. He would use his powers to exterminate his opponents and pack the Senate with men loyal to himself. He curtailed the authority of the people's tribune and would retire after 3 years of severe autocratic rule. This brings me to, of course, our favorite, the bust of Julius Caesar, or Julius Kaiser, as he will be referred to by me. Kaiser's nickname meant hairy, but it has come to be synonymous with imperial title. It was the title preferred by the German kings of the late 19th and 20th centuries, who called themselves Kaisers, and by the Tsars of Russia. In classical Latin, the C is hard, which, of course, it makes Caesar Kaiser, and for the Russians, that slips to a TS sound.
Now, Pompey and Caesar were, in some ways, a dream team. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, 106 to 48 BCE, and Caius Julius Caesar, 100 to 44 BCE. Now, they initially cooperated in a plot to gain control of the government and had forged an alliance with the third general, Marcus Junius, known as a Triumvirate. but the Triumvirate dissolved into open rivalry. Pompey won fame as the conqueror of Syria and Palestine. Caesar conquered Gaul and promoted his conquests in his work on the war in Gaul.
Sulla's dictatorship empowered the aristocracy and weakened the power of the plebs, but new leaders emerged to espouse the people's cause, using the army as a tool. Let's consider Julius Caesar's rise to power, his march into Rome, his attempted stop by Pompey, his repeated military triumphs. I explain this to my middle school students in this way, and I hope you accept the analogy. Imagine if the President of the United States goes to war in a foreign nation, in this instance, what would kind of be modern day Germany, comes back with his army and is about to be arrested because of debts. He owed so much money that he was simply avoiding this debt crisis to his moneylenders that he's effectively fleeing state responsibility. So, a second president, your second president, in this instance Pompey, sends an army out to stop him specifically from marching into what would be the nation's capital with an army as a means of security from his own debt collectors. Kaisers, that is. Now imagine one president goes and kills effectively the other president, taking over the state with their own army, and then everyone in the state, in other words, our country, begins to cheer the new president because they just killed the previous one and took military control. That, if you like, is the best way in 2025 I can draw comparisons. And we can see why the Ides of March might happen, let alone the other actions, the autocratic authoritarian actions Caesar's going to take. But we'll get to those soon.
Now, on to Caesar and Cleopatra. Now, Ptolemy the 13th was engaged in a civil war with his elder sister, Cleopatra the 7th, 69 to 30 BCE. Caesar supported Cleopatra. They had a son who was named Caesarion, Little Caesar, who was born 9 months later. Ptolemy was defeated and mysteriously drowned in the Nile. Cleopatra took as escort an even younger brother, known as Ptolemy the 14th, but she ruled as Pharaoh of Egypt in her own right. Caesar returned to Rome in triumph, and in 46 BCE, he was named dictator for 10 years. 2 years later, a lifetime appointment to that same position. The senators, afraid that he would restore the monarchy, assassinated him in March of 44 BCE.
Following his return in triumph in 46 BCE, and after being named dictator for first 10 years and then life, and obtaining full authority from the Senate, he revised the calendar to make a 365-day year and adding an extra day every fourth year. Does this sound familiar? I hope it does. He conferred citizenship to the residents of Spain and Gaul. He settled veterans and the urban poor on these newly conquered lands he brought back from Gaul. Now, what's amazing to me is Caesar, or Kaiser if you prefer, is doing the right things the wrong way. He did far more for the people of Rome than any prior leader, even if he did so in a very autocratic fashion.
Meanwhile, back at Rome, in the Hall of Super Friends, while Caesar was away, Pompey was elected sole consul and declared that Caesar was an enemy of the Republic. The result, obviously, deadly civil war. In 49 BCE, Caesar took up Pompey's challenge and crossed the Rubicon River. Pompey fled to the east and was defeated by Caesar at Pharsalus, in 48 BCE. Pompey fled to Egypt then and was assassinated by an agent of Ptolemy the 13th.
Now, whether or not you believe the account that Kaiser wept over Pompey's corpse after being sent his head as a gift, there were close connections between Pompey and Caesar, and in some ways, this is a tragedy, Kaiser's tragedy, that these two close friends had such a dramatic falling out, two people of supreme power and authority. And I hope you see, as we're kind of flipping back and forth in their narrative, exactly what we mean. But let's turn our attention to Cleopatra the Seventh, because she also had a dual identity as both Egyptian pharaoh and Hellenistic ruler. Like her ancestor Ptolemy the First, Cleopatra represented herself as both the enlightened Greek monarch and pharaoh. It was perhaps owing to her example that Julius Caesar was the first Roman leader to issue coins impressed in his own image, which also made him a very popular person. But how does Cleopatra's self representation compare to that of, let's say, Hatshepsut or even Ptolemy? While I won't cover it in detail here, Historia Civilis, or Kiwiis if you prefer, does a great job covering Caesar's death, the assassination, everything that led up to it, and the immediate aftermath. The death of Kaiser would send shockwaves through Rome, just as Kaiser's actions brought the Republic to the verge of collapse and his son would establish the imperial period. Kaiser's death mirrors an earlier time in Rome's history, its very birth. And from Kaiser's death and assassination, we get these, the Ides of March coins. The coin here celebrates the assassination of Julius Caesar by Marcus Junius Brutus, and of course many others who were ultimately less willing to stab Kaiser and actually kill him, but who also would then stab him after he was already dead and dying, just to say that they did it. But anyway, I digress. Here, shown on the face and the reverse, we have the cap of liberty, customarily worn by freed slaves, and it's flanked by two daggers. Below it, we have Eidmar, in Latin, of course, meaning the Ides of March. Given that Kaiser drew criticism for depicting himself on Roman coinage, consider, what do you think the significance of Brutus's image being shown on the coin this way is?
Well, with the first triumvirate dead, a second soon arose. In his will, Caesar adopted his grandnephew, Caius Octavius, or Octavian, 63 BCE to 14 CE. Octavian returned to Rome, renamed himself Caius Julius Caesar the Younger, and soon found that he had rivals.